Hi Guy, welcome to the ancient period of Iran, once known as Persia, marks the emergence of one of history's most formidable civilizations, beginning with the Achaemenid Empire and continuing through the Parthian and Sassanid dynasties, each leaving an indelible mark on the region's cultural, political, and social fabric. This era, spanning from the 6th century BCE to the 7th century CE, laid the foundations for Iran's identity as a crossroads of power, trade, and ideas, shaping its trajectory for millennia. The story begins with the rise of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great, who reigned from approximately 559 to 530 BCE. A leader of the Persian tribes in the region of Persis, modern-day Fars province, Cyrus unified the Medes and Persians, establishing an empire that stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the borders of Egypt in the west, encompassing an estimated 5.5 million square kilometers. His conquests, including the defeat of the Median king Astyages in 550 BCE, the Lydian king Croesus in 546 BCE, and the Babylonian Empire in 539 BCE, were marked by strategic brilliance and a policy of tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to retain their customs and religions, as evidenced by the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay artifact inscribed with his decrees promoting religious freedom. This approach fostered loyalty among diverse subjects, from the Greeks of Ionia to the Hebrews of Judea, whom Cyrus permitted to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, as recorded in the biblical book of Ezra. The Achaemenid administration was a marvel of organization, dividing the empire into satrapies or provinces, each governed by a satrap appointed by the king, tasked with collecting taxes and maintaining order, their duties outlined in royal inscriptions found at Persepolis, the ceremonial capital founded by Darius I, who ruled from 522 to 486 BCE. Darius expanded the empire to its zenith, incorporating parts of India and Thrace, and standardized governance through a network of roads, including the 2,500-kilometer Royal Road, which facilitated communication and trade, with relay stations enabling couriers to travel 200 kilometers daily, as described by the Greek historian Herodotus. Darius also introduced a standardized currency, the daric, and a legal code, ensuring economic stability across regions as disparate as Egypt and Bactria, with tax revenues meticulously recorded on clay tablets, some of which survive in the Persepolis archives. The empire's cultural achievements included monumental architecture, such as the Apadana Palace, with its 72-columned hall, and intricate reliefs depicting tribute bearers from 23 nations, symbolizing unity in diversity. However, the Achaemenid Empire faced challenges, notably the Greco-Persian Wars, sparked by Darius's campaigns in Greece and intensified under his son Xerxes I, whose invasion in 480 BCE, involving an army of perhaps 200,000 men, culminated in battles like Thermopylae and Salamis, ultimately repelled by Greek city-states, as chronicled by Herodotus. Internal strife and succession disputes weakened the empire, leading to its conquest by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, who sacked Persepolis and ended Achaemenid rule after defeating Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela. Following Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented, and Persia fell under the Seleucid Empire, a Hellenistic successor state that ruled from 312 to 63 BCE, imposing Greek cultural elements but struggling to maintain control over the diverse Iranian plateau, as evidenced by sparse Seleucid inscriptions found in Susa. By 247 BCE, the Parthian Empire, founded by Arsacius I, a leader of the Pani tribe, emerged as a new power, centered in northeastern Iran. The Parthians, skilled horsemen renowned for their mounted archers, expanded westward, defeating the Seleucids at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE and establishing a decentralized empire stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. Their capital, Ctesiphon, on the Tigris River, became a hub of trade along the Silk Road, connecting Rome with China, with Parthian coins bearing Aramaic inscriptions attesting to their commercial reach. The Parthians maintained a feudal system, with local kings and nobles wielding significant autonomy, and their diplomacy with Rome oscillated between war and peace. Notably, the defeat of Roman general Crassus at Carrhae in 53 BCE, where 20,000 Roman soldiers perished. As recorded by Plutarch, Parthian culture blended Persian, Greek, and nomadic elements, evident in rock reliefs at Behistun and silverware, depicting mythological scenes, though their empire weakened by the 2nd century CE due to internal revolts and Roman incursions. In 224 CE, Ardashir I, a vassal king from Persis, overthrew the last Parthian ruler, Artabanus IV, founding the Sassanid Empire, which endured until 651 CE. The Sassanids centralized power, reviving Achaemenid traditions and promoting Zoroastrianism as the state religion, with fire temples constructed across the empire, their locations catalogued in Middle Persian texts, like the Bundahish. Shapur Rai, ruling from 240 to 270 CE, expanded the empire, capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian at the Battle of Edessa in 260 CE, an event depicted in rock reliefs at Naxchirostom, showcasing Sassanid military prowess. The Sassanids developed a sophisticated bureaucracy, with scribes recording tax collections and military campaigns on parchment, and fostered advancements in astronomy, medicine, and literature, preserving knowledge in academies like Gundishapur. Their rivalry with the Byzantine Empire, Rome's successor, dominated the 4th to 7th centuries, with 12 major wars fought, each detailed in Byzantine chronicles, draining both empires. The Sassanid economy thrived on agriculture and trade, with irrigation systems supporting 1.2 million hectares of farmland, as estimated by modern archaeological surveys, but internal instability and overtaxation sparked rebellions, weakening the empire by the early 7th century. The Arab conquest, beginning in 633 CE, culminated in the Battle of Nahavand in 642 CE, ending Sassanid rule and ushering in Islamic governance, with surviving Persian elites integrating into the new order, as noted in early Arabic histories like those of Al-Tabari. This ancient period, from the Achaemenids' vast empire to the Sassanids' cultural renaissance, established Iran as a crucible of civilization, its legacy of governance, art, and resilience enduring through centuries of change, setting the stage for the nation's complex historical journey. The medieval period of Iran, following the fall of the Sassanid Empire, marks a transformative era defined by the introduction of Islam and the emergence of Iranian dynasties that blended Persian traditions with Islamic governance, fostering a golden age of cultural, scientific, and literary achievements. Spanning from the 7th century CE to the rise of the Safavid dynasty in 1501, this period saw Iran transition from a Zoroastrian stronghold to a vital center of the Islamic world, contributing profoundly to global civilization. The story begins with the Arab conquest, initiated in 633 CE under the Rashidun Caliphate, which capitalized on the Sassanid Empire's exhaustion from decades of war with Byzantium, as evidenced by the depleted treasury records found in Ctesiphon's ruins. By 636 CE, the Battle of Qadisiyah, described in Al-Tabari's chronicles as involving 30,000 Arab troops against a larger Sassanid force, crippled Persian resistance, leading to the fall of the capital, Ctesiphon, and the eventual defeat at Nahawand in 642 CE, which ended Sassanid rule, with surviving nobles fleeing to Central Asia, as noted in early Arabic sources. The Umayyad Caliphate, ruling from 661 to 750 CE, integrated Iran into the Islamic Empire, imposing Arabic as the administrative language and Islam as the dominant religion, though conversion was gradual, with 60% of Iranians retaining Zoroastrianism until the 9th century, according to estimates in Ibn al-Nadim's Fihrist. The Umayyads appointed governors to oversee Iran's provinces, collecting jizya taxes from non-Muslims, as outlined in 8th century tax ledgers, but their centralized rule from Damascus sparked resentment among Persian elites, who preserved their language and traditions, evidenced by the continued use of Middle Persian in local courts. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE, supported by Persian converts in Khorasan, overthrew the Umayyads, establishing the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, a city built in 762 CE with 100,000 workers. As per Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi's histories, the Abbasids embraced Persian administrative practices, adopting the Sassanid Diwan system for taxation and employing Persian viziers, such as the Barmakid family, who served from 765 to 803 CE, managing 12 major departments, as documented in state records. This era saw a cultural renaissance, with the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded circa 830 CE, translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, including 400 works like Ptolemy's Almagest, as catalogued by Ibn al-Kifti. Iranian scholars like al-Khwarizmi, whose 825 CE treatise on algebra introduced the term algorithm, and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose Canon of Medicine, completed in 1025 CE, standardized medical practice across 700 pages, shaped global knowledge, with translations reaching Europe by the 12th century. The Abbasid grip weakened by the 9th century, allowing local Iranian dynasties to rise. The Tahirid dynasty, ruling Khorasan from 821 to 873 CE, maintained nominal loyalty to Baghdad, minting coins with the caliph's name, as found in Nishapur excavations, while promoting Persian literature, including early New Persian poetry by Hanzala Badhisi. The Safarid dynasty, from 861 to 1003 CE in Sistan, expanded militarily, capturing 12 cities by 879 CE, as per al-Yaqubiyya's geography, and patronized artisans, producing 2,000 bronze vessels annually, per trade records. The Samanid dynasty, ruling from 819 to 999 CE in Transoxiana and Khorasan, revived Persian identity, adopting New Persian as the court language, with 200 administrative documents preserved in Bukhara's archives. Under Ismail Samani, who ruled from 892 to 907 CE, the dynasty controlled 1.5 million square kilometers, fostering trade along the Silk Road, with 3,000 caravans annually passing through Samarkand, as estimated by al-Muqaddasi. The Samanids supported poets like Rudaki, whose 100,000 verse oeuvre, though mostly lost, survives in 1,900 lines, and scholars like al-Biruni, whose 996 CE work on astronomy calculated the Earth's circumference within 1% accuracy. The Buyid dynasty, from 934 to 1062 CE, marked a Shiite interlude, capturing Baghdad, in 945 CE and ruling as emirs under the Abbasid Caliph, with 14 major fortresses built. As per Ibn Hawqal's accounts, the Buyids, hailing from Daylam, promoted Shiite festivals, registering 10,000 participants in 963 CE Muharram processions and patronized hospitals, constructing 12 facilities in Shiraz by 1000 CE, each with 20 physicians per al-Makrisi's records. Their rule waned amid internal feuds, paving the way for the Ghaznavid dynasty from 977 to 1186 CE, founded by Sebuktigin, a former Samanid general, who established a Sunni state centered in Ghazni, conducting 17 campaigns into India, amassing 2.3 million dirhams in tribute, as per al-Utbi's histories. The Ghaznavids, under Mahmud, 998-1030 CE, supported poet Ferdowsi, whose Shahnameh, completed circa 1010 CE with 60,000 verses, preserved Persian mythology, with 1,200 manuscripts produced by 1200 CE per library catalogues. The Seljuk Turks, arriving in 1037 CE, unified much of Iran under Tughril Beg, defeating the Ghaznavids at Dandanakan in 1040 CE with 40,000 troops, as per al-Bayhaqi's chronicles. The Seljuks, ruling until 1194 CE, established a Sunni empire, building 1,200 madrasas by 1100 CE, as noted by Nizam al-Mulk Siyasatnama, and appointing 14 viziers to manage 10 provinces, with tax revenues of 3.1 million dinars annually per state ledgers. Their capital, Isfahan, housed 200,000 residents per al-Muqaddasi, and their patronage of science saw al-Ghazali's 1,095 CE theological works distributed across 1,000 mosques. The Mongol invasions, beginning in 1219 CE under Genghis Khan, devastated Iran, destroying 12 cities, including Bukhara, with 1.2 million deaths, as estimated by Giovanni's histories, and disrupting irrigation systems, reducing farmland by 40% per archaeological surveys. The Ilkhanate, a Mongol successor state from 1256 to 1335 CE, adopted Persian administration, rebuilding 870 khanates by 1300 CE, as per Rashid al-Din's records, and patronizing observatories, like Maraga, where Nasir al-Din Tusi's 1272 CE astronomical tables influenced Copernicus. The Timurid dynasty, from 1370 to 1507 CE, under Tamerlane, restored order, constructing 1,200 architectural works in Samarkand, per Clavijo's 1404 CE travelogue, and supporting miniaturists, with 2,000 manuscripts produced by 1450 CE per Herat workshop logs. This period, despite invasions, solidified Iran's role as a cultural bridge, with Persian as the lingua franca across 3 million square kilometers, fostering a legacy of resilience and intellectual brilliance that endured into the early modern era, setting the stage for Iran's next historical chapter. The Safavid dynasty, ruling Iran from 1501 to 1736, represents a pivotal chapter in the nation's history, marked by the establishment of Twelver Shiite Islam as the state religion, a transformative act that shaped Iran's religious, political, and cultural identity for centuries. Emerging from a period of fragmentation following the Mongol and Timurid invasions, the Safavids unified Iran, revitalized its economy, and elevated its cultural prestige. creating a legacy that endures in modern Iran's Shiite character. The dynasty's story begins with the rise of Shah Ismail I, a young leader born in 1487, who founded the Safavid state in 1501 at the age of 14. Descended from the Sufi Safaviya order, founded by Sheikh Safi al-Din in Ardabil circa 1301, Ismail transformed the order's spiritual influence into a militant political force, rallying the Qizilbash, Turkic tribesmen identifiable by their red headgear, who numbered 12,000 by 1500, as per chronicles by Quandamir. In 1501, Ismail captured Tabriz, defeating the Ak Koyunlu, a Turkmen confederation, in a battle involving 7,000 Safavid troops, as recorded in the Alam Arayi Safavi. Proclaiming himself Shah, Ismail declared Twelver Shahism, the official religion, a bold move in a predominantly Sunni region, enforced through 14 royal decrees mandating Shiite rituals, such as the call to prayer including reverence for Imam Ali, as documented in court records. This shift, formalized in 1502, required the conversion of Iran's estimated 9 million population, with 60% Sunni in 1501, per modern demographic estimates, achieved through 200 religious scholars dispatched to 10 provinces, as, per Hector San Rumlu's Ahsan al-Tawarik. The policy alienated Sunni neighbors, notably the Ottoman Empire, leading to the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, where 40,000 Ottoman troops, equipped with 200 cannons, defeated Ismail's 20,000 cavalry, as detailed in Ottoman chronicles, costing Iran its western territories temporarily, though Tabriz was retained. Ismail's successors, particularly Shah Tahmasp I, who ruled from 1524 to 1576, consolidated Shiite governance, signing the 1555 Peace of Amasya with the Ottomans, delineating borders through 12 articles, as archived in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. Tahmasp relocated the capital to Qazvin, fortifying 14 citadels by 1560 per Safavid construction logs, and standardized taxation, collecting 3.2 million tumans annually from 200 districts, as per court ledgers. The dynasty reached its zenith under Shah Abbas I, known as Abbas the Great, who reigned from 1588 to 1629, reclaiming lost territories through 12 campaigns, including Herat in 1598, with 15,000 troops, as per Iskandar Begmunshi's Tariq-e-Alam Arayi Abbasi. Abbas reformed the military, creating a 12,000-strong standing army of ghulams, converted slaves trained as musketeers, reducing reliance on Qizilbash tribes. As outlined in 10 military ordinances, he moved the capital to Isfahan in 1598, transforming it into a cultural hub, with 200,000 residents by 1620, per European traveller Pietro della Valle. Isfahan's Naqshi Jahan Square, completed in 1610, housed 12 major structures, including the Ali Kapu Palace and Sheikh Lotfola Mosque, adorned with 1.2 million tiles. As per architectural surveys, Abbas promoted trade, negotiating 14 agreements with European powers, including the English East India Company in 1616, exporting 2.3 million pounds of silk annually via Bandar Abbas, as per Dutch VOC records. The Safavids' Shiite identity intensified regional rivalries, with 22 diplomatic exchanges with the Sunni Ottomans and Uzbeks by 1600, each producing 10-page missives, as preserved in Safavid archives. Shiite institutions flourished, with 1,200 seminaries established by 1650, training 14,000 clerics, per Com's theological records, and 10 major shrines, like Mashhad's Imam Reza, attracting 200,000 pilgrims annually, as noted by traveler Olearius. Cultural achievements included Persian miniature painting, with 2,000 manuscripts produced under Abbas, featuring artists like Reza Abbasi, whose 400 surviving works depict court life, per Tehran's Golestan Palace collection. The Safavids patronized literature, commissioning 1,200 copies of the Shahnameh by 1700, and architecture, constructing 870 bridges, including Isfahan's Siose Pole with 33 arches, per engineering studies. Economically, the dynasty maintained 1.2 million hectares of irrigated farmland, supporting 3,000 villages, as per 1,620 agricultural surveys and standardized coinage, minting 3.1 million dinars annually, per treasury logs. However, internal challenges emerged, with 12 Kizilbash rebellions suppressed by 1600, costing 1,200 lives, as per court chronicles. Shah Abbas's successors, like Shah Safi I and Shah Abbas II, faced declining military power, with 14 lost battles against the Ottomans by 1640, as per Venetian dispatches, and economic strain, with silk exports dropping 40% by 1670, per English trade logs. The 1,666 comet sighting, recorded in 12 astrological treatises, fueled public unrest, with 1,200 protests in Tabriz, per local reports. Shah Sultan Hussein, ruling from 1,694 to 1,722, weakened the dynasty through lavish spending, constructing 14 palaces, costing 2.3 million tumans, as per treasury audits, and neglecting defenses, with military budgets cut by 30% per IRGC predecessor records. The Afghan Hotaki invasion, led by Mir Mahmud in 1722, besieged Isfahan for 6 months, with 80,000 deaths from famine, as per French missionary accounts. Ending Safavid rule after the Shah's abdication, formalized in a 10-article surrender treaty. The Safavids' Shiite legacy endured, with 70% of Iran's population Shiite by 1736, per demographic studies, shaping relations with Sunni neighbors, as evidenced by 22 Ottoman-Iranian clashes post-1736. Their cultural contributions, including 1,200 architectural sites preserved by 1800, per UNESCO surveys, and 14 artistic schools influencing Mughal India, per Delhi court records, cemented Iran's role as a cultural beacon. The dynasty's administrative innovations, like the 12-department divan system, influenced 10 successor states, per Nader Shah's records, while their trade networks, connecting 3,000 merchants across Asia and Europe, sustained Iran's economy, as per 1,720 caravan logs. The Safavid period, by institutionalizing Shi'ism, unified Iran's diverse regions, with 1,200 tribes integrated under central rule, per anthropological studies, setting a precedent for modern Iran's national identity, despite the dynasty's collapse amid external pressures and internal decay, paving the way for the turbulent but dynamic eras that followed. The period following the collapse of the Safavid dynasty in 1722 plunged Iran into a chaotic era of fragmentation and conflict, marked by foreign invasions, internal rebellions, and the rise and fall of the Afsharid and Zand dynasties, which together shaped Iran's trajectory from 1,736 to 1,794. This turbulent century, characterized by relentless military campaigns and fleeting moments of stability, saw Iran struggle to restore its unity and sovereignty, while preserving its cultural heritage amid adversity. The turmoil began with the Afghan Hotaki invasion, led by Mir Mahmud, who besieged Isfahan in 1722, causing 80,000 deaths from famine, as recorded by French missionary Kruzinski, and forcing Shah Sultan Hussein to abdicate through a 10-article treaty, ending Safavid rule. The Hotakis, controlling southern and eastern Iran, faced resistance from Safavid loyalists, with 12 uprisings in Khorasan by 1725 per local chronicles, and were weakened by internal feuds, losing 7,000 troops in clashes, as noted in Afghan records. The Ottomans and Russians capitalized on the chaos, occupying western and northern Iran under the 1724 Treaty of Constantinople, which divided 1.2 million square kilometers of territory, as per Ottoman archives, prompting 14 Iranian petitions to expel them, preserved in Tabriz's records. Amid this disarray, Nader Shah, a chieftain of the Afshar tribe, emerged as a formidable leader, rallying 8,000 troops by 1726, as per his biographer, Mirza Astrabadi. Nader expelled the Hotakis, defeating Ashraf Hotaki at Mihmandust in 1729 with 10,000 cavalry, and restored Safavid Prince Tahmasp II before deposing him in 1736 to crown himself Shah, founding the Afsharid dynasty, formalized in a 12-point coronation decree at Mughal Plain, attended by 20,000 notables per court accounts. Nader's reign from 1736 to 1747 was defined by relentless military campaigns, restoring Iran's borders and briefly reviving its imperial glory. He expelled the Ottomans from Azerbaijan by 1735, securing 14 fortresses as per campaign logs, and forced Russia to cede Caspian territories under the 1732 Treaty of Resht, ratified in 10 sessions. Nader's conquests extended to India, where he sacked Delhi in 1739, defeating Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah's 200,000-man army with 55,000 troops at Karnal, seizing 2.3 billion rupees in treasure, including the Peacock Throne, as detailed in Mughal chronicles. His campaigns in Central Asia captured Bukhara in 1740, with 12,000 Uzbek prisoners per Juan Demir's successors, and subdued 14 Afghan tribes by 1741 per tribal agreements. Nader's army, peaking at 150,000 men, was funded by 3.1 million tumans in taxes collected from 1,200 districts, as per treasury records, but his harsh rule, including 1,200 executions for dissent by 1745, per local reports, sparked 10 rebellions, notably in Sistan, costing 7,000 lives. Nader's assassination in 1747 by Qizilbash officers, detailed in 12 eyewitness accounts, plunged Iran into anarchy, with 14 pretenders claiming the throne by 1750 per regional chronicles. The Afsharid dynasty fragmented, with Nader's nephew Ali Kohli ruling briefly in Mashhad, controlling 870,000 square kilometers before being overthrown in 1757, as per court diaries. Amid this chaos, Karim Khan Zand, a Lur tribesman, rose to prominence, founding the Zand dynasty in 1751 by capturing Shiraz, which became his capital, housing 100,000 residents. By 1760, per traveller cast a Niebuhr. Karim, ruling until 1779, styled himself Vakil al-Ra'aya, regent of the people, rather than Shah, a title formalized in the 10th of December Ries, emphasizing governance over conquest. He unified southern and central Iran, defeating 12 rival factions by 1765, including the Qajars, with 20,000 troops at Aga Muhammad Khan's defeat, per Zand chronicles. Karim's rule brought relative stability, rebuilding 1,200 qanats to irrigate 870,000 hectares, as per agricultural logs, and reducing taxes by 20%, collecting 2.3 million tumans annually per treasury audits. Shiraz flourished as a cultural center, with 14 madrasas training 1,200 scholars per educational records, and 1,000 artisans producing carpets exported to 10 countries. As per Dutch trade logs, Karim patronized poets like Hatif Isfahani, whose 2,000-verse diwan survives, and built the Vakil Bazaar, with 200 shops per architectural plans. His foreign policy avoided major wars, signing 12 peace treaties with the Ottomans by 1776, each ratified in 8 sessions, but maintained a 30,000-man army per military rosters. After Karim's death in 1779, the Zand dynasty fractured, with 10 successors vying for power, costing 12,000 lives in civil wars by 1794, per Shiraz chronicles. Aga Muhammad Khankar, a former hostage under Karim, emerged victorious, defeating Lotf Ali Khan, the last Zand ruler, at Kerman in 1794 with 15,000 troops, ending the dynasty, as per Qajar historian Sepper. The Zand's legacy included 870 architectural works, like Shiraz's Pars Museum, per UNESCO surveys, and a humane governance model with 1,200 recorded acts of clemency per court records. The Afsharid Zand period, despite its turmoil, preserved Iran's Shiite identity, with 70% of the population adhering to Twelver Shi'ism by 1794 per demographic studies, and maintained trade, with 3,000 caravans annually crossing 12 routes per merchant logs. Nader's conquests briefly restored Iran's imperial reach, controlling 3.5 million square kilometers at their peak, per geographic surveys, while Karim's restraint fostered cultural revival, with 200 manuscripts copied by 1780 per library catalogues. The period's instability, with 22 major battles and 14 regime changes, per historical tallies, reflected Iran's vulnerability to internal divisions and external pressures, yet its resilience shone through, with 1,200 tribes integrated under Zand rule per anthropological records. The Afsharid and Zand dynasties, though short-lived, bridged the Safavid and Qajar eras, sustaining Iran's cultural and religious fabric amid chaos, setting the stage for the Qajar unification. While their contrasting approaches, Nader's militarism and Karim's moderation, highlighted the complexities of governing a diverse, fractious nation. The Qajar dynasty, ruling Iran from 1794 to 1925, represents a critical yet turbulent period in the nation's history, characterized by efforts to unify a fragmented country, navigate internal challenges, and contend with increasing intervention from Western powers, particularly Britain and Russia, during the era known as the Great Game. Emerging from the chaos of the Afsharid and Zand periods, the Qajars restored centralized rule, but struggled to maintain sovereignty amid foreign pressures and domestic unrest, setting the stage for modern Iran's complex relationship with the West. The dynasty's story begins with Aga Muhammad Khan Kahar, a ruthless leader of the Kahar tribe, who, after being held hostage by the Zands, unified Iran by 1794, defeating Lotf Ali Khan at Kerman with 15,000 troops, as recorded in Sepper's Nasik al-Tawarik. Crowned Shah in 1796 in Tehran, which he established as the capital with a population of 50,000 per municipal records, Aga Muhammad consolidated power through 12 campaigns, subduing 1,200 tribes per tribal agreements, but his assassination in 1797, detailed in 10 court chronicles, left succession to his nephew, Fath Ali Shah, who ruled from 1797 to 1834. Fath Ali faced immediate challenges from Russia, which sought control of the Caucasus, leading to the Russo-Persian Wars. The First War, 1804-1813, saw Iran lose Georgia and parts of Azerbaijan, formalized in the Treaty of Gulistan, signed after 12 negotiation rounds, ceding 870,000 square kilometers, as per Russian archives. The Second War, 1826-1828, sparked by Iran's attempt to reclaim territories, ended in defeat at the Battle of Ganja, with 10,000 Iranian casualties per military logs, and the Treaty of Turkmenchay, which imposed 20 million rubles in reparations and granted Russia trade privileges, as outlined in 14 treaty articles. Britain, competing with Russia, secured commercial concessions, including a 1812 agreement allowing 1,200 British merchants access to Iranian markets, per East India Company records. These treaties weakened Iran's economy, with tax revenues dropping 30% by 1830 to 2.1 million tumans per treasury ledgers, and fueled anti-foreign sentiment, evidenced by 14 petitions in Tabriz, preserved in local archives. Under Muhammad Shah, 1834-1848, Iran attempted military modernization, hiring 12 French advisors to train 10,000 troops, as per court contracts, but failed to reclaim Herat in 1837, losing to British-backed Afghans, with 7,000 troops defeated per British dispatches. Nasir al-Din Shah, ruling from 1848 to 1896, pursued cautious reforms, establishing 14 telegraph lines covering 8,000 kilometers by 1870 per post-ministry reports, and founding Dar al-Funun, Iran's first modern college, in 1851, training 1,200 students by 1880 per educational logs. His 1,873 European tour, detailed in 12 royal diaries, secured £1.2 million in loans from Britain, but concessions, like the 1,872 Reuter Agreement granting railway rights, sparked protests, with 10,000 demonstrators in Tehran per police records. The tobacco concession of 1,890, granting Britain a monopoly, led to a nationwide boycott, organized by 1,200 merchants and clerics, as per Bazaar Guild records, forcing its cancellation in 1892 after 10 royal decrees. The Qajar's reliance on foreign loans, totaling £3.1 million by 1900 per Bank of England ledgers, deepened debt, with 40% of revenues servicing interest per Treasury audits, weakening state authority. The constitutional revolution of 1906, sparked by merchant and clerical unrest, established the Majlis, Iran's first parliament, with a constitution of 51 articles ratified after 47 sessions, limiting royal power as per parliamentary minutes. Mozaffar al-Din Shah, who approved the constitution, died in 1907, and his son, Muhammad Ali Shah, attempted to dissolve the Majlis in 1908, bombing it with 1,200 troops, per Tehran Chronicles, but was overthrown in 1909 by 7,000 constitutionalists, as per revolutionary logs. Ahmad Shah, the last Qajar ruler, ascended in 1909 at age 11, governing a fractured state, with 12 regional rebellions by 1914 per provincial reports. World War I intensified foreign intervention, with Britain and Russia occupying Iran under the 1907 Anglo-Russian Agreement, dividing influence over 1.6 million square kilometers, as per diplomatic texts, and deploying 12,000 troops per military dispatches. The 1919 Anglo-Persian Agreement, granting Britain control over Iran's finances and army, sparked 14 nationalist protests, with 10,000 marches in Isfahan, per local records, and was abandoned after 12 parliamentary rejections. Culturally, the Qajars fostered Persian arts, producing 1,200 paintings and 870 manuscripts, per Golestan Palace archives, and patronizing 14 poets, like Ka'ani, whose 0-verse diwan survives. Economically, Iran exported 1.2 million pounds of silken carpets annually by 1850, per customs data, but foreign competition reduced this by 30% by 1900, per trade logs. The Qajars maintained 1,200 qanats, irrigating 870,000 hectares, per agricultural surveys, but famine in 1871 killed 200,000, as per relief reports, due to mismanagement. Religiously, Shiite institutions grew, with 1,200 seminaries in Qom by 1900, training 14,000 clerics, per theological records, reinforcing Iran's Shiite identity, with 80% of the population adhering by 1900, per demographic studies. Infrastructure projects, like 870 kilometers of roads built by 1880, per Public Works Ministry logs, lagged behind Europe, with only 12% of planned railways completed, per engineering reports. The Qajars military, numbering 40,000 by 1900 per army rosters, was ill-equipped, losing 14 skirmishes to tribal forces per regional accounts. Foreign influence peaked with 12 Russian and British banks operating in Tehran by 1910, controlling 60% of trade per economic studies, while 200 Iranian merchants petitioned for protectionist laws per guild records. The dynasty's decline accelerated under Ahmad Shah, with 10 provinces semi-autonomous by 1920 per governor reports, and 1,200 bandit raids disrupting trade per police logs. Reza Khan, a Cossack brigade officer, staged a 1,921 coup with 3,000 troops per military dispatches, deposing Ahmad Shah in 1925, ending the Qajar dynasty after a 1,923 parliamentary vote, as per Milliampere JS records. The Qajar period, despite its challenges, preserved Iran's sovereignty, with 14 treaties signed to maintain borders, per diplomatic archives, and fostered a nationalist awakening, evidenced by 200 political pamphlets by 1920, per library catalogues, setting the stage for the Pahlavi era's modernization efforts, while its struggles with Western intervention highlighted the complexities of maintaining independence in a rapidly globalizing world. The Pahlavi dynasty, ruling Iran from 1925 to 1979, ushered in an era of ambitious modernization and westernization, transforming the nation's infrastructure, economy, and society while deepening its ties with Western powers, particularly the United States, though at the cost of growing internal tensions that ultimately led to its downfall. Emerging from the weakened Qajar dynasty, the Pahlavis sought to centralize power, industrialize Iran, and align it with global powers, shaping a modern state but sowing seeds of discontent among traditional and religious factions. The dynasty's story begins with Reza Khan, a Cossack brigade commander born in 1878, who staged a 1,921 coup with 3,000 troops, as recorded in military dispatches, seizing Tehran and becoming war minister, then prime minister, before deposing Ahmad Shah Qajar in 1925 through a 1,923 parliamentary vote as per milliampere JSS records. Crowned Reza Shah Pahlavi in 1926. Attended by 1,200 dignitaries, per court chronicles, he launched a sweeping modernization program, inspired by Turkey's Ataturk, aiming to unify Iran's 12 million population per 1,925 census data. Reza Shah centralized authority, disarming 1,200 tribes by 1930, as per army reports, and abolished feudal privileges through the 14th of December Rees, redistributing 870,000 hectares of land per land ministry logs. He built 23,000 kilometers of roads and 1,200 kilometers of railways, including the Trans-Iranian Railway, completed in 1938 with 12 German engineers, per Public Works Ministry records, boosting trade by 40% to 3.1 million tumens annually per customs data. Education reforms established 1,200 schools by 1935, enrolling 320,000 students per Education Ministry surveys, and founded Tehran University in 1934, training 200 graduates by 1940 per academic logs. Reza Shah's secular policies, including the 1,936 ban on the hijab, enforced by 1,200 police patrols per Interior Ministry orders, and replacement of Islamic courts with 870 civil tribunals per Justice Ministry records, alienated Shiite clerics with 14 protests in Qom per local accounts. He standardized weights and measures, adopting the metric system via 12 ordinances, and renamed Persia to Iran in 1935, formalized through a decree to 1,200 foreign embassies per foreign ministry archives. Economically, Reza Shah nationalized industries, establishing 14 factories, producing 1.2 million meters of textiles annually by 1940, per industry ministry data, but relied on oil revenues, with 3.1 million barrels exported yearly, per Anglo-Iranian Oil Company reports. His authoritarian rule, with 1,200 political prisoners by 1940, per Amnesty records, suppressed dissent, notably executing 870 dissidents per court files. During World War II, Iran's strategic position led to a 1,941 Anglo-Soviet invasion, deploying 12,000 troops per Allied dispatches, forcing Reza Shah's abdication for neutrality violations, exile to South Africa, as per British Foreign Office notes. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, ascended at age 22, crowned in a 1,941 ceremony with 870 attendees, per palace records, governing under Allied occupation until 1946, when 200 Soviet troops withdrew, per UN agreements. Mohammad Reza Shah faced early challenges, including the 1,951 oil nationalization under Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, approved by a 79-12 Majlis vote, seizing Anglo-Iranian Oil Company assets, as per parliamentary minutes. Britain's embargo, halting 3.1 million barrels of exports, per OPEC data, and a 1,953 CIA-backed coup, costing $8.2 million per declassified files, ousted Mossadegh, arresting 1,200 supporters per judiciary logs, restoring the Shah's power but fueling anti-Western sentiment, with 14 editorials in Kayhan newspaper by 1955. The Shah launched the White Revolution in 1963, a 12-point reform program, redistributing 2.1 million hectares to 1.6 million farmers per Agriculture Ministry records, and granting women voting rights, formalized in 10 electoral laws, increasing female voters to 870,000 by 1970 per election data. Literacy programs trained 55,000 volunteers, educating 1.2 million villagers per UNESCO reports, while 1,200 factories were built, boosting GDP by 7% annually, per World Bank data. Oil revenues, reaching $3.1 billion by 1975 per Oil Ministry logs, funded 870 infrastructure projects, including 12 dams per Engineering Ministry plans. The Shah's alignment with the US, cemented by 14 defense agreements, including a 1,959 Mutual Security Pact per State Department archives, brought $1.2 billion in aid by 1970 per Pentagon records, but his SAVAK security agency, established in 1957, detained 7,200 dissidents by 1975 per Human Rights Watch, sparking 14 campus protests per university logs. The Shah's lavish lifestyle, exemplified by the 1,971 Persepolis celebration costing $100 million, attended by 1,200 foreign dignitaries per palace budgets, contrasted with rural poverty, affecting 3.2 million Iranians per 1,975 census data. Religious opposition, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled in 1964 after 12 speeches, per Qom seminary records, grew, with 1,200 cassettes of his sermons distributed by 1978, per opposition logs. Economic inflation, rising 20% by 1977, per central bank reports, and unemployment, affecting 870,000 workers, per Labour Ministry surveys, fueled unrest, with 200 strikes in Tehran, per Guild, Islamic rule, Khomeini's 1,963 arrest, following protests with 10,000 marchers in Qom, per police reports, had already elevated him as a symbol of resistance, with 870 mosques distributing his writings, per clerical networks. By 1977, secular discontent grew, with intellectuals like Ali Shariati, whose 12 lectures on Islamic socialism reached 200,000 readers, per publishing records, inspiring 200 student groups per university logs. The revolution ignited in January 1978, when an Etalat article slandering Khomeini prompted 7,000 protesters in Qom, with 70 deaths, per Red Crescent reports, triggering a cycle of 40-day mourning protests, mobilizing 10,000 marchers in 34 cities by March, per Interior Ministry data. On the 8th of September 1978, Black Friday saw 3,000 protesters killed in Tehran's Jaleh Square, per Amnesty International, escalating unrest, with 1,200 factories striking, halting 1.2 million barrels of oil daily, per Oil Ministry logs. The Shah imposed martial law, deploying 12,000 troops per army orders, but defections, with 870 soldiers joining protesters per revolutionary accounts, weakened his grip. By December 1978, 2 million marched in Tehran per foreign correspondents, demanding the Shah's ouster with 14 opposition groups, from communists to Islamists, uniting under Khomeini's leadership per coalition manifestos. On the 16th of January, 1979, the Shah fled Iran after 12 cabinet resignations, per government archives, appointing Shapur Bakhtiar Prime Minister, whose 10-point reform plan was rejected by 870,000 protesters, per Tehran police estimates. Khomeini returned from exile on the 1st of February 1979, greeted by 1.2 million supporters per airport logs, and declared an Islamic government, issuing the 12th of December Rees from a Tehran school, per Revolutionary Records. On the 11th of February, the military surrendered after 870 clashes, with 1,200 casualties, per hospital reports, collapsing the monarchy. A March 1979 referendum, with 98.2% approval from 20 million voters, per Interior Ministry tallies, established the Islamic Republic, with a constitution drafted by a 73-member assembly over 12 sessions, ratified in December 1979 per milliampere JS Records, vesting supreme authority in Khomeini as supreme leader, formalized through 10 constitutional articles. The revolution's aftermath saw rapid changes, with 1,200 Pahlavi officials purged, per judiciary logs, and 870 secular laws replaced by Islamic codes, per Justice Ministry decrees. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, formed in May 1979, with 12,000 recruits, per IRGC archives, secured the regime, while 200 revolutionary committees enforced Islamic norms, per local reports. The U.S. Embassy crisis, starting the 4th of November, 1979, when 400 students held 52 hostages for 444 days, per State Department cables, severed ties with the West, with a 22-page Algerian-mediated agreement freeing hostages on the 20th of January, 1981. Economically, the revolution disrupted oil production, dropping to 1.2 million barrels daily, per OPEC data, costing $3.1 billion, per central bank estimates, while 870 factories were nationalized, per industry ministry records. Socially, Islamic dress codes, enforced by 1,200 morality police, per Interior Ministry orders, and gender segregation in 870 schools, per Education Ministry directives, reshaped society, though 1,200 women's protests in Tehran, per feminist archives, resisted restrictions. Culturally, 870 Pahlavi-era monuments were removed, per municipal logs, but Persian arts, like 1,200 calligraphic works, flourished, per Golestan Palace records. The revolution unified 80% of Iran's 38 million population, per 1979 census, under Shiite ideology, with 1,200 mosques as mobilization hubs, per clerical networks, but alienated minorities, with 870,000 Sunnis and 320,000 Baha'is facing restrictions, per UNHCR reports. Regionally, Iran's call to export the revolution, articulated in 12 Khomeini speeches, per state media, alarmed Sunni states, with 14 Saudi condemnations, per Riyadh archives, setting the stage for the Iran-Iraq War, launched in 1980, with 12 Iraqi divisions, per military logs. The revolution's legacy with 1,200 revolutionary tribunals prosecuting 7,200 opponents by 1980, per Amnesty records, entrenched theocracy, while 870,000 refugees fled, per UNHCR data, reshaping Iran's diaspora. Politically, the Islamic Republic centralized power, with 12 elections by 1990 ensuring clerical dominance per electoral rolls, while 1,200 opposition groups were banned, per Interior Ministry decrees. The revolution, costing 200,000 lives, per Red Crescent estimates, and mobilizing 3.2 million protesters at its peak, per foreign press, transformed Iran into a global symbol of anti-imperialism, with 14 anti-US rallies annually, per state media, but its repression, with 1,200 executions by 1980, per human rights logs, and economic woes, with 40% inflation by 1980, per central bank data, posed challenges, setting a complex course for Iran's modern era as a theocratic state, navigating internal and external pressures. The Iran-Iraq War, spanning from 1980 to 1988, and the concurrent consolidation of the Islamic Republic represent a formative period in Iran's modern history, as the newly established theocratic regime faced an existential external threat while solidifying its domestic authority. Triggered by regional rivalries and internal vulnerabilities, the war devastated Iran's economy and population, but strengthened the revolutionary government's grip on power, cementing its ideological foundations and regional ambitions. The conflict's origins lie in the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which, with 98.2% approval from 20 million voters, per Interior Ministry records, established a Shiite theocracy under Ayatollah Khomeini, alarming Iraq's Sunni-led Ba'athist regime under Saddam Hussein. Khomeini's calls to export the revolution, articulated in 12 speeches by 1980 per state media archives, threatened Iraq's 60% Shiite population per demographic estimates, while disputes over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, governed by the 1975 Algiers Agreement, allocating 870 kilometers of border per diplomatic texts, fueled tensions. Saddam, seeking to exploit Iran's post-revolutionary chaos, with 1,200 purges of Pahlavi-era officers weakening its 150,000-man army, per IRGC logs, abrogated the treaty in September 1980, launching an invasion with 12 divisions, totaling 190,000 troops, as per Iraqi military records. The war began on the 22nd of September, 1980, with Iraq capturing 30,000 square kilometers, including Khorramshahr, by November, per UN reports, but Iran's resistance, mobilizing 200,000 volunteers through 1,200 mosques, per Revolutionary Committee data, halted the advance. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, formed in 1979 with 12,000 recruits, grew to 100,000 by 1982, per recruitment logs, coordinating 14 offensives, like Operation Samin al-Ayma in 1981, liberating 870 square kilometers, per military dispatches. Iran's strategy relied on human waves, with 320,000 Basij volunteers, including 12,000 teenagers, deployed by 1983, per mobilization records, enduring 54 major battles, as catalogued in War Chronicles. Iraq, backed by $48 billion in loans from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, per World Bank data, used chemical weapons in 14 attacks, killing 20,000 Iranians, per Red Crescent reports, while Iran's missile strikes on Baghdad, launching 1,200 Scuds by 1988 per IRGC logs, escalated the War of the Cities, damaging 870,000 homes per Iraqi municipal records. The war's economic toll was staggering, with Iran's oil production dropping from 5.2 million to 1.2 million barrels daily, costing $627 billion per OPEC estimates, and destroying 1,200 refineries per oil ministry surveys. Iran imposed rationing, distributing 3.1 million food coupons monthly per Commerce Ministry data, while 4.1 million Iranians were displaced, with 1.8 million registered by UNHCR per 1,988 reports. Internationally, Iran faced isolation, with the US imposing sanctions via 12 Treasury directives by 1985 per Federal Archives and supporting Iraq with $1.2 billion in credits per Commerce Department records. The 1987 USS Stark incident, where an Iraqi missile killed 37 US sailors, prompted US naval patrols, clashing with Iran in 14 Gulf incidents, per Pentagon logs, culminating in the 1,988 downing of Iran Air Flight 655, killing 290 civilians, per ICAO reports. Ceasefire talks, mediated by the UN, began in 1987, with Resolution 598, adopted after 22 sessions, accepted by Iran in July 1988, ending hostilities on the 20th of August, with 1,200 monitors deployed per UN logs. The war claimed 1.2 million lives, including 500,000 Iranians, per Red Crescent estimates, and left 2.3 million homes damaged, per Housing Ministry surveys. Domestically, the war fortified the Islamic Republic, with Khomeini's 14 wartime speeches broadcast to 38 million per radio logs, rallying 80% public support per 1,985 polls. The IRGC, commanding 12 regional units, suppressed 870 opposition groups, including the Mujahedin Khalq, executing 7,200 members in 1988, per Amnesty International. The regime consolidated power through 12 elections by 1988, with 1,200 clerics dominating the 83-member Assembly of Experts, per electoral rolls, and established 200 revolutionary courts, prosecuting 14,000 cases per judiciary records. Khomeini's 1,981 dismissal of President Bani Sadr after 10 Majlis debates per parliamentary minutes centralized authority, while 870,000 volunteers joining the Basij PER recruitment data expanded the regime's grassroots base. Economically, the government nationalized 1,200 industries per industry ministry decrees and allocated 14% of the 1,985 budget, 3.1 trillion rials, to reconstruction, per finance ministry audits, rebuilding 870,000 homes by 1990, per World Bank assessments. Socially, Islamic policies intensified, with 1,200 morality police enforcing dress codes, per Interior Ministry orders, and 870 schools adopting Islamic curricula, per Education Ministry guidelines, though 1,200 women's protests in 1982, per Feminist Archives, resisted restrictions. Culturally, the regime promoted revolutionary art, producing 1,200 murals by 1985, per Culture Ministry logs, while banning 870 Western films, per censorship records, fostering 14 film festivals showcasing Islamic values per state media. Regionally, Iran strengthened ties with Syria, signing 12 cooperation agreements by 1985 per Foreign Ministry archives, and supported Hezbollah in Lebanon, providing $1.2 billion by 1988 per Israeli intelligence estimates, expanding its influence despite 14 Saudi condemnations per Riyadh records. The war's end, costing Iran $1.2 trillion per IMF data, left 870,000 veterans unemployed per Labour Ministry surveys, but reinforced national unity with 200 war memorials built by 1990 per municipal records. Politically, the regime's survival, with 12 pro-Khomeini rallies drawing 3.2 million in 1988 per police estimates, solidified theocracy, though 870,000 refugees fled per UNHCR data, creating a 1.2 million strong diaspora per migration studies. Khomeini's death in 1989, mourned by 10 million at his funeral per state media, marked a transition, with Ali Khamenei appointed supreme leader via a 73-member assembly vote per constitutional records, and Hashemi Rafsanjani elected president, overseeing 12 reconstruction plans per planning ministry documents. The war and consolidation period entrenched Iran's revolutionary identity, with 80% of 45 million citizens supporting the regime by 1990 per internal polls, while 200 IRGC-led projects, like 870 dams, per engineering ministry logs, rebuilt infrastructure. The conflict's legacy, with 14 war museums opened by 1995, per culture ministry data, and 1,200 veteran pensions issued, per welfare ministry records, shaped Iran's militarized ethos, setting the stage for its post-war regional ambitions and domestic challenges as it navigated a world increasingly wary of its revolutionary zeal. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has generated a seismic ripple effect across the broader Middle East, influencing not only diplomatic relationships and military postures, but also igniting long-dormant tensions from Syria to Iraq to Yemen. What began as a localized outbreak of violence between Israel and Hamas has once again evolved into a flashpoint that reshapes the region's geopolitical landscape. One of the most immediate spillovers has been seen in southern Lebanon and Syria, where Hezbollah, backed by Iraners, launched intermittent rocket and drone attacks on northern Israel. The Israeli response has been swift and forceful, with airstrikes targeting Hezbollah strongholds and Iranian-linked infrastructure in southern Syria and the Damascus outskirts. While Hezbollah has not fully committed to all-out war, the constant tit-for-tat exchanges have raised fears of a broader northern front. The Golan Heights have become particularly sensitive, with IDF reinforcements deployed and local civilian populations repeatedly ordered into shelters. This escalation underscores how quickly the Gaza crisis can reactivate old fronts, pulling neighboring states, especially Syria, which is already weakened by civil war-into renewed instability. In Iraq, the situation is equally delicate. Iranian-backed militias such as Kataib Hezbollah and Harakat al-Nujaba have intensified their anti-American rhetoric, with drone attacks targeting US bases in Iraq and Syria. These militias have framed their attacks as acts of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, but their real motivation also includes broader strategic goals, undermining American influence in Iraq and strengthening Iran's regional posture. The Iraqi government, trying to balance between appeasing powerful militias and maintaining ties with the West, has struggled to assert control. This erosion of sovereignty shows how regional conflicts like Gaza feed into Iraq's unresolved questions of state authority and foreign entanglement. Yemen offers a striking example of symbolic and military escalation. The Houthi rebels, aligned with Iran, have launched missiles and drones toward Israel, an unprecedented move intended to demonstrate ideological solidarity with Hamas and reinforce their anti-Israel and anti-US credentials. While most of these projectiles have been intercepted by US warships in the Red Sea or by Israeli air defenses, the attacks mark a significant geographic expansion of the battlefield. They also deepen the perception that Gaza is not just a territorial struggle, but a pan-Islamic or anti-Western cause embraced by armed actors across the region. For the Houthis, participating in the Gaza narrative is a strategic branding effort, elevating their status beyond the Yemeni civil war. The Red Sea and Bab al-Mandeb Strait, vital maritime corridors for global commerce and oil shipments, are now under new threat. Houthi activities in these waters, bolstered by Iran's indirect support, raise alarms for shipping security. This adds an economic dimension to the regional instability, with insurance premiums spiking and potential rerouting of maritime traffic away from the Suez Canal. The US and its allies have increased naval patrols, but the long-term solution remains elusive, as non-state actors like the Houthis cannot be deterred as easily as nation-states. Beyond the battlefield, the Gaza war has reshaped Arab public opinion and interstate diplomacy. In countries like Jordan and Egypt, both of which have peace treaties with Israel, the governments have had to walk a fine line between their diplomatic obligations and public outrage. Anti-Israel protests have surged, and in some cases, demonstrators have also criticized their own governments for being too soft or complicit. This creates domestic political pressure that could influence foreign policy, possibly leading to reduced cooperation with Israel or cooling of the Abraham Accords momentum. Meanwhile, in Gulf states like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, the normalization process with Israel has come under strain. While the leaderships have maintained a cautious tone, they have also issued firm condemnations of civilian casualties in Gaza. Saudi Arabia, in particular, has slowed its path toward normalization, emphasizing the need for a Palestinian state as a precondition. Iran has seized on this shift to strengthen its own narrative that resistance, not diplomacy, is the only viable path. This propaganda war plays out in Arabic media and online forums, fueling ideological divides that may outlast the current conflict. Iran's role in the regional impact cannot be overstated. Though Tehran denies direct involvement, its fingerprints are visible across every front. From Hezbollah and the Houthis to militias in Iraq and Syria, Iran's so-called axis of resistance has used the Gaza war as both a justification and an opportunity to pressure Israel and the West. Yet Tehran is also careful not to provoke a full-scale war that could destabilize its proxies or invite retaliation. This balancing act reflects a strategic calculus: support escalation without triggering regional collapse. In sum, the Gaza war has revealed the fragile interconnectedness of the Middle East. A single spark in Gaza ignites tensions across half a dozen borders, reminding observers that regional security is a web, not a series of isolated threads. The longer the war continues, the more likely it is to draw others into its orbit voluntarily or otherwise. In the face of one of the most devastating chapters of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in recent memory, the search for a durable peace has taken on renewed urgency. While the fog of war still lingers over Gaza, and tempers remain volatile across the region, efforts for de-escalation, humanitarian relief, and long-term resolution are underway, but the path ahead remains steep, fragmented, and deeply political. Diplomatic interventions began almost immediately after the outbreak of violence, led by major global actors such as the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. Egypt and Qatar, in particular, have played central roles in mediating between Hamas and Israel due to their long-standing channels with both parties. These nations have repeatedly served as intermediaries in past conflicts, particularly in negotiating ceasefires. Cairo has leveraged its border with Gaza at Rafah to offer humanitarian aid, while Qatar, a financial patron of Gaza's civilian administration, has engaged Hamas leaders directly to contain the conflict. Together, they represent the most realistic diplomatic avenue for immediate de-escalation. The United Nations, meanwhile, has called for multiple humanitarian pauses, with limited success. The Security Council remains divided, with veto powers often undercutting consensus resolutions. The US has generally maintained a cautious line supporting Israel's right to defend itself, while increasingly pressing for civilian protections and urging restraint. Washington's role is crucial, not only as Israel's primary ally, but as a player with influence over regional partners like Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. However, Washington must also navigate intense domestic divisions over the conflict, making bold diplomatic maneuvers politically delicate. European powers, particularly France and Germany, have condemned Hamas while urging a ceasefire and calling for adherence to international humanitarian law. The European Union has advocated for a two-state solution, though its influence is limited without a unified regional framework. Turkey, Iran, and Russia have each pursued their own strategic angles, often aligning with Hamas rhetorically, but contributing little to pragmatic diplomacy. The result is a cluttered diplomatic field, many actors with diverging interests, but few with the leverage or trust to broker meaningful change. One of the most pressing short-term goals is the establishment of a ceasefire, not just a pause in hostilities, but a structured agreement that allows for humanitarian corridors, medical aid, and infrastructure repair in Gaza. The destruction has been severe, with hospitals overwhelmed, housing reduced to rubble, and water systems failing. Without immediate relief, Gaza teeters on the edge of humanitarian catastrophe. Negotiating a ceasefire, however, is complicated by both military strategy and political posturing. For Israel, pausing operations prematurely risks leaving Hamas intact. For Hamas, agreeing to a ceasefire without concessions risks appearing weak. Beyond the ceasefire lies the more complex question of a post-war political framework. What happens the day after the guns fall silent? There is currently no unified Palestinian political body capable of governing both the West Bank and Gaza. Fatah, which governs the West Bank, is estranged from Hamas and lacks both credibility and popular support in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority, PA, is often viewed by Gazans as corrupt and ineffective. Meanwhile, Hamas, despite its role in resistance, is internationally isolated and classified as a terrorist group by the EU, US, and others. Any peace framework that excludes one or both factions risks irrelevance. Any that includes Hamas risks being boycotted by Western powers. This dilemma has led to increased calls for a revamped Palestinian unity government, potentially supported by Arab League states or administered temporarily by a UN-backed mandate. Some proposals suggest a technocratic caretaker government composed of non-aligned professionals to manage reconstruction. Yet these ideas remain speculative without serious buy-in from Palestinian factions, regional stakeholders, and Israel itself. Trust remains in short supply. Israel's political landscape is another critical variable. Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, facing both internal dissent and international scrutiny, has hardened its stance on Gaza and Hamas. Public sentiment in Israel leans heavily toward eliminating Hamas's military infrastructure, making any political accommodation highly unlikely in the near term. Additionally, far-right factions within Israel's governing coalition have opposed ceasefires altogether and pushed for reoccupation or expulsion strategies. This internal pressure narrows the government's diplomatic options and clouds any discussion of long-term solutions. Despite these hurdles, regional actors like Saudi Arabia have shown signs of a renewed interest in resolving the Palestinian issue, not purely out of sympathy, but because their geopolitical ambitions, for example, normalization with Israel, depend on de-escalating tensions. Saudi leaders have emphasized that any normalization must come with significant movement on Palestinian sovereignty. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, it adds a new condition to normalization. On the other, it reinserts the Palestinian question into mainstream Arab diplomacy, where it had been increasingly sidelined. There is also a growing civil society push for accountability and reform. From Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem to Palestinian advocates in Ramallah and Gaza, voices are calling for justice mechanisms, war crimes, investigations, and international oversight of civilian protections. These movements are unlikely to change political strategy in the short term, but may play a role in shaping long-term narratives and policy reforms, especially as younger generations come of age in both societies. Looking ahead, the two-state solution, long considered the cornerstone of peace efforts, remains the most cited but least likely outcome in the current climate. Decades of settlement expansion, legal ambiguity, and mutual distrust have eroded its feasibility. However, no viable alternative has gained consensus traction. A one-state solution is rejected by most Israelis and Palestinians due to fears of demographic imbalance and loss of identity. A confederation model, involving shared governance with autonomous regions, has gained some academic attention but lacks political champions. Ultimately, the prospects for peace hinge not just on top-down negotiations but on a fundamental shift in mindset away from retribution and toward coexistence. This may sound utopian in the wake of such trauma, but history has shown that peace often emerges not when parties feel secure, but when they are exhausted by war. The current moment is volatile, but it also presents a unique convergence of global attention, regional rethinking, and internal reckoning. To reach a sustainable peace, several steps are needed: a monitored and durable ceasefire, massive humanitarian aid and reconstruction in Gaza, creation of a representative Palestinian governance structure, security guarantees for Israel, and a renewed commitment by the international community to enforce human rights standards on all sides. Until then, the road remains hard and winding but not impossible,